Hi, Jen here from Jen Michelle Coaching, and today I want to talk about how to build a love bond versus feed a trauma bond. This is a subject that comes up a lot in my work with women and something I want to take a deeper dive into today. For those of you new to my channel, I would love to invite you to subscribe. I release a video weekly. So in terms of building a love bond versus a trauma bond, building a love bond means that we are essentially feeding love. We are releasing fear, and fear isn't motivating us within our relationships, and we are actively calling ourselves out and supporting ourselves in choosing to release survival instincts and feed the more surrendered, open, and expansive part of ourselves. A trauma bond is where we tend to loop the same patterns, where we make choices that are familiar and comfortable, but not necessarily healthy or good for us. These choices often stem from what was modeled for us growing up. So we can enter unhealthy relationships unconsciously, subconsciously, because that's what's familiar, and our nervous system will equate familiarity with safety, but deep down we know that that is not serving our highest good, and that we are so much more than what we've been through in the past, and we are choosing to work against what is been normalized or what we've been conditioned to believe love is, and we start to sort of forge a new way. So we're growing the love bond while actively releasing and ridding ourselves of trauma bonds and those patterns. So number one, recognize where there are codependent tendencies. And by codependent tendencies, I mean you're looking out versus looking in. You're looking at dating or your partner. Who do I need to be for them? What's going to keep me safe? What's going to be pleasing for them, and forgetting about yourself and what feels really sort of authentic and true to you. This is a way in which we can catch ourselves just going into codependent patterns. We're looking out to see if we're safe versus creating that safety within. So this is a mechanism where we start to really build strength on the inside, and in that is a softening and an openness on the outside, because as we integrate this more and more, we're becoming a person that's just comfortable with themselves, and we don't feel like we have to put on so many masks of the ego, like perfectionism or pleasing another and sacrificing ourselves, or doing things that are rooted in self-betrayal, or things that are going to ultimately leave us feeling energetically unclean, right? So it's this beautiful sort of awareness that begins to motivate us, where we're creating this safety inside, so we feel less and less dependent upon feeding the pattern and looking for safety on the outside. Number two, willingness to build from something new. This means that we are actively going up against the patterns and what we have made love mean. An example would be, in my upbringing, my parents argued a lot growing up, and so I associated love with, oh, love is arguing and then making up constantly, right? That was what love was for me. And I had to recognize those tendencies that I brought into relationship and that were really challenged in the early years of my marriage, and turn love into something new. Really feel into the way in which my husband was directing love, and where I needed to let go of limitations and what had been normalized within my system. And in that was some uncomfortable growth, and a lot of surrender, and a lot of trust, and a lot of breathing through stories and dialogue around what I made that new way of connecting mean. And so in the beginning, I remember, just as an example, I equated that with boring, right? Like a lack of drama it must have meant that we were all bored and that we weren't growing. And he really supported our growth as a couple in helping me reprogram that by loving me through that and being that stable, grounded foundation, challenging that narrative, and me then recognizing that and opening up to it and creating a new pathway within myself where love is rooted in mutual respect. It is rooted in having hard conversations, but having those in a way that is intentional and holds space for all opinions and viewpoints, and to not fear conflict, right? To open myself up to those like parts of myself that would rather hide or play small or just be right. And so that's what begins to shift within us in partnership, is we challenge those aspects that have tried to stay safe under the guise of limiting beliefs, and we bring them to the surface and we work through them together, right? And in this, I think, is an important point where we're not making our partner the enemy, right? Where we're not viewing them as an adversary, and we're viewing any challenge in the relationship as a mutual challenge that we get to work through and face together. And in that is an immediate softening and kind of quiets the threat response and rids us of that us against them mentality that can ultimately drive huge wedges and spaces in any stage of love and relationship. Number 3, you're releasing and witnessing those tendencies within yourself with a lot of deep humility. So when you are releasing codependency and trauma bond patterns, you are having to call yourself out a lot. And this can be really exhausting because a lot of these deeply embedded patterns, they've been automated. They're literally like, getting up and hopping in the shower. You're not even thinking about it. So when you are witnessing yourself in this new way, be compassionate with yourself, because it can be really exhausting, because you're having to peel back all of these things that you just did and bring a higher level of questioning, witnessing, and curiosity to them. Why do I want to do that? Let me think about this comment before I speak it out loud. So things that you just automatically did, you are having to now kind of get still with and sit with and see what the underlying motivation is. If it's rooted in something old that kind of needs to go away, or if it is very intentional in something that feels like the right thing to share or speak to. And so when we're like working with these unhealthy mechanisms of the ego, it is part of the up-leveling is to like bring a lot of questioning to them, so the ego can start to follow your lead and say, oh yeah, I don't need to do it that way. Like, I don't need to blare my horn at the person in front of me. I can just like take a deep breath and choose to do it differently in this moment, and recognize that that is going to be short-sighted because it is not going to make him go any faster. And so we start to like filter our reactions and responses in love in a way that really redirects the compass over time, right? And so we start to instead push up against that resistance and choose to take the deep breath or choose that moment of stillness. And we see over time how that builds a love bond, and how over the course of doing this for 6 months or a year, we see how we have landed and supported ourselves in moving to a very, very different place. So I would love to hear how these 3 tips support you, and these 3 practices that are really humbling and opening just support you in your love in any stage over time. For those of you that are interested in learning more about this, I have my digital offering around healing your attachments and creating a love bond. I will link it below, and I invite you to check that program out if you want to take a deeper dive into any of this. Much love, and see you next week.